Hi everyone, welcome to the lecture of Remove the Stigma, presented by Hillbridge and NAMICC Costa. So without further ado, let me get right started. So before I actually tell you what is stigma and what everything information about mental illness, let's start with a question. Why are we here? As a host, why am I doing this right now? As a viewer, why are you watching this right now? Because we're all eager to learn everything about mental illness, right? We're trying to help perhaps a friend, perhaps a family member who are suffering or who are living with mental illness condition. So that is the reason we're here. But at the same time, there are so many myths out there. There are so many misinformation. There are so many prejudgment about mental illness and mental health conditions. So we're eager to learn more about it. We are eager to learn the correct information. That is why we're here. So with that, we're going to start today's lecture. And this is just a preview of what I'm going to go over with for the next roughly hour. First, I'm going to introduce what is mental illness and what is the definition of stigma. And then I'm going to share some basic information or background knowledge about mental health and mental illness by numbers. How many people are out there? How many people need help? And how many people who are looking for help but can't get anything? And the third, I'm going to go over types of mental illness. Since the one bigger myth of mental illness is like it's not a real disease, it's just something blah blah blah. That is not true. So for the third part, we're going to go over different types of mental illness and see what is the difference between them and how we can help them. Finally, the last step, what we can do. What effort can we make as a family member or as a friend or as a community individuals? What are the things we can do to help? So before this lecture, have you ever heard the word stigma? Maybe you are, maybe you're not. So let me briefly introduce what does this word mean. The word stigma is like a blockage. It's like trying to block you from doing something because of the shame and dishonor you're feeling at something. For example, in mental illness, having stigma could mean like, hey, I'm suffering from depression, but I don't really want to tell to anyone. I feel like it is dishonor. I'm just ashamed that I have depression. That is a stigma. And the whole purpose of today's lecture is trying to remove this stigma from every one of us, including the patient, including the family member, or you're just walking down the street. As a normal person, you should not have stigma regarding our mental illness. It could be both internal and external. For example, you could be afraid of the judgment from outside and have stigma, or you're just afraid that, hey, I don't want to tell people I have depression or bipolar. That is also internal stigma. How can we remove the stigma? What thing do we need to do? That is sort of the number one question I'm having in my mind for the last 1 year. And it turns out the only thing we need to do is to clear out those myths. We need to clarify the facts and get rid of those misinformation about those stereotypes regarding our mental illness. That is the number one thing we need to do. So today, I'm here to tell some correct info to you. First of all, let's define what is mental illness. A mental illness is a condition that affects a person's thinking, feeling, behavior, or mood. These conditions deeply impact day-to-day living and may also affect the ability to relate to others. Having mental illness can have a variety of type, which I will go over later. But right now, the only thing you need to know that mental illness will affect your daily ability, your everyday thinking, feeling, behavior, and mood. Of course, the top one myth about mental illness, especially in Asian culture, will be, is mental illness a real thing? I often heard my parents talk to me when I was young. They're like, hey, you're just having a bad time. It will get over. Just like tough up yourself. Be tough. That is not true. Mental illness, it is a real disease or conditions. It's just the same thing as having cancer or having a cold or having diabetes or having a heart attack. It's a real disease that's happening in your brain. For like early stage or like for like mild symptom, of course, it's not like some of the symptom has been changed. It's not that level yet. You're just having like a mood dysfunction, or you're having like a irregular routine. But when it grows to later, or like to the serious stage of mental illness, it will actually affect the function in your brain. It will actually change the neurons attached to each other. And that is a real disease. Also, mental health disorder are the #1 reason for hospitalization and admission nationwide. This is definitely a real thing. And even if we tell a person, hey, having mental illness, it is a real thing, he might argue that, it's not that common, right? Just like only a few people have it. That is also not true. In the United States, 1 in 5 adults experience mental illness each year. That is 20%. That is huge. So maybe the next time you go to class or you're having a dinner with your family, look around. For a class around about 30 people, there will be roughly about 6 people who are suffering from mental illness. That is very scary. And 1 in 20 US adults experience serious mental illness each year. 1 in 6 US young age from age to 6 and 17 experience mental health disorder each year. And to me, I personally relate this the most. 50% of all lifetime mental illness began by age 14. So for me, I'm an example, right? I'm in community college right now, and I'm age 20. So at this age, almost 50% of us have already experiencing mental illness. This is not like a mid-age crisis, or this is not a disease you will get when you're turning to 60. This is happening from children to teenagers to adults all the time. And those results are from National Survey on Drug Use and Health from the US Department of Health and Human Services. So this is really happening right now, nationwide and worldwide. And since we answered that question, it's really common and it's a real thing. You may ask, hey, where does that come from? Just like if you have a cold, you're being affected by the viruses, right? If you're having like a bacterial infection, it is those tiny little bacteria who are affect you. And for mental illness, it is the same. This slide is from a famous doctor, which he just gave us a lecture about 2 days ago. This is very, theoretic. This is very like high advanced theory. So I have another slide for you, which will separate the mental illness reasons for 2 causes. The first is biological causes. This could be like fetal alcohol syndrome or genetics from your parents or grandparents, or from infection that can cause brain damage, or like injury, or like huge defects. This is the biological causes. But the more commonly is another cause. It is psychological causes. Severe psychological trauma, such as exposure to violence, emotional, physical, sexual abuse, and important early loss, such as the loss of a parent or marriage. Also, social issues like racism, poverty, violence, etc. Those are another common causes for mental illness. So again, there are well-known, like, I wouldn't call it a theory. There's a well-known news that's going out there. Everyone's blaming the victim, say, hey, why you're doing this? This is causing you to blame. That is not true in mental illness. There's no one's fault in this case. For example, if someone is having depression or bipolar, no one should own that fault. No one should own that mistake. It is not his duty. It is not the environmental duty. It is not his fault. It is not his parents' fault. It is no one's fault. It just happened. We cannot blame anyone or anything for that. That is very crucial in mental illness. None of this means that you're broken or that you or your family did something wrong. Mental illness is no one's fault. And for many people, recovery, including meaningful role in social life, school, and work, is possible, especially when you started treatment early and play a strong role in your own recovery process. Now, I've clarified some basic myths for you. Now let's dive into some of the common types of mental illness. There are so many types of mental illness I can ever imagine. For example, there are like eat disorder, where a patient who might eat too much and like physically like make him throw up and eat again. I forgot the name of it, but I know there's type of disease. But here today, due to time limit, we're only gonna focusing on those common types of mental illness. And actually, one of my friends, like he's a psychological major, I think, he reminded me that bipolar is type of the anxiety disorder. But here we're gonna talk them separately. So with that, let's go through depression. Depression disorder, frequently referred to simply as depression. It's more than just feeling sad or going through a rough patch. It's a serious mental health condition that requires understanding and medical care. Left untreated, depression can be devastating for those who have it and their families. Fortunately, with early detection, diagnosis, and a treatment plan consisting of medication, psychological therapy, and healthy lifestyle choices, many people can do and get better. So depression, it is not what my mom said, saying, hey, it's just a rough day, it's just a bad day, you will get through it. That is not the case. It is a real disease, just like having a cancer. That is the number one thing we need to pay attention to. And the number two myth about depression is that it will become better naturally. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. Medication help and professional help like therapy definitely help the most. I can conclude that from my personal experiences and my friends' experiences. Depression can present different symptoms depending on the person. But for most people, depressive disorder changes how they function day to day, and typically for more than 2 weeks. That is also a key number to remember. I will refer to this later. So common symptoms for depression include change in sleep and appetite, lack of concentration or lack of interest in activity, loss of energy, hopelessness or guilty thoughts, change in movement, physical ache and pain, suicidal thoughts. Those are some symptoms you should look out for, especially on yourself and your friend. But also remember the number for 2 weeks. For the mild symptoms, sometimes you're having pressure due to an exam or having a big project that is due tomorrow. Like that kind of depression is not, it's not usually the real depression symptom or depressive disorder. So time is really key here. If you consistently suffering from all of the symptoms for more than 2 weeks, then it's very crucial to seek out for help, which I'll also get to later. Besides depression, we also have bipolar disorder. For some people, this is very familiar, but for some people, they've never heard of this name before. So for bipolar disorder, it is episodic extreme between states of depression and excitement. So sometimes a person who are suffering or who are living with bipolar disorder, sometimes they can get super excited, like, hey, it is the greatest day of my life. They will get maniac, they will like have too much energy to do everything, and they will not stop talking, they will not relax a little bit. But for some days, they will like suffering major depression, like it is the worst day of my life. Like they cannot think of anything positive. They will stay in that negative energy for like days. And bipolar disorder is actually a large, who is very common, roughly 2% of general population over a lifetime. So we have 7 billion people on Earth, 2%, it is a very large number. Also, half the cases begin before age 20. So again, this is not something you have until age 70. This will happen at a very early age of your life. And the normal symptoms of bipolar disorder, besides what I mentioned before, like super excited and super depression, like they're happening in different period. They also have restlessness, rapid speech, and poor concentration, increased impulsivity or energy, and less need for sleep, high sex drive, tendency to make grand and unattainable plans, tendency to show poor judgment, such as deciding to quit a job, shopping sprees, drug and alcohol abuse. That is also an important one for bipolar disorder. Besides that, the anxiety is also a big thing, especially among teenagers. Anxiety disorder will also have symptoms like panic attack. They will have several things like obsessive compulsive disorder. Those are some subtitle of anxiety. As I mentioned before, bipolar is also a type of anxiety based on my friend. So definitely this is like a big area, and there are certain things we need to look out for. And the treatment for anxiety are also quite common or also quite easy to learn. But again, the reason why I put this slide here is just to let you know that there are certain treatment for anxiety and bipolar. Your job is not to give out some certain medicine to your family or family member, or sorry, your friend or family member. Your job is here to support them, to help them to get to a doctor or a therapist. Those treatments are just for references. They're not supposed to be given out to a certain patient. But typical treatment for anxiety can be mood stabilizer and antidepressant medication, and also education. Education is a big part, especially for the patient and for the family members, to create a lovely environment. Since before I talk about the environmental trigger or the psychological causes for mental illness, having a nice environment can affect them the most. Treatment for anxiety also include activity scheduling, music, group, and faith services, exercise, sleep, hygiene, light therapy, and nutrition. Those are all some important factors to consider here. Also, PTSD is one type of the anxiety disorder that some individual experiences after living through a traumatic event, which often happen on the veteran group, since they will often experience some traumatic events on the battlefield. Or it could have anything to do with sexual or physical assault, the unexpected death of a loved one, an accident, or a natural disaster. So PTSD symptoms are best understood by placing them in three categories: re-experiencing, avoidance, and hyperarousal. Re-experiencing it is pretty straightforward. When you're having a traumatic event, and after months or years, you suddenly re-experience it in that situation, it will cause you a flashback and it will raise up your physical level. You're feeling scared and frightened at that moment since you're experiencing that bad thing all over again. And avoidance is like before you see that something will happen that you will get triggered to, you're already suffering from, you'll try to avoid them as much as possible. So in this case, a lot of the PTSD patient or the people who are living with PTSD disorder, they often like try not to talk or think about the trauma. They're trying to avoid reminders of the trauma, like refuse to go to those places and meet the same people again. They will have trouble concentrating. They will have difficulty in remembering. And the hyperarousal will be sometimes the PTSD, the people who are living with PTSD disorder, they will easily get anger. Their irritability will go sky high. They will have sleep problems since like they can not get out of that feelings all over again. And they often found to have self-destructive behavior like excessive drinking, drug or alcohol abuse, or just physically hurting themselves. Those are very common symptoms. And we have schizophrenia. This is also a very severe problem, very serious symptoms that are happening in mental illness. Schizophrenia affects the way a person thinks, behaves, relates to the world around them. And this can be very obvious or not detectable at all. Symptoms of schizophrenia are best understood in three categories, which is positive, negative, and cognitive. For positive schizophrenia, delusions are very common. For example, they will hallucination, they can hear and see things that didn't exist. They can smell and feeling like some highly power that are interacting with them, or feeling things that are not there. They will often feel of being controlled by outside sources. Their movement will get blocked or obstacled. it is called a movement disorder. Like they will repeat their sentences, they will have an agitated body movement, or extreme opposite, such as like a coma stage. And for the negative part, they will have difficulty focusing, they will have social withdrawal, they would not like to get out and social with people, they would not make any new friends, they will have loss of appetite, they will not want to eat. That is the negative side of the symptoms of schizophrenia. And the cognitive symptoms are like loss of hygiene, inability to make any decisions. They will often, hey, what if I do this? What if I do that? And very hard for them to make a decision. And we also have ADHD. It is called the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. This is also a very common symptom or condition in America. And for this symptoms, it is highly usually appear in children before the age of 7. And symptoms maybe appear more pronounced in boys and girls. For ADHD, it have so many inattentive symptoms, like fail to pay close attention to details, seems make careless mistake in schoolwork, and seems not listen even when spoke to directly. Has difficulty following through on instruction and often fails to finish schoolwork, chores, and other tasks. Often has problem organizing tasks or activities. Avoids or dislikes tasks that require sustained mental effort, such as schoolwork or homework. I have several friends who are suffering from ADHD, and the most common phrase that I heard from them is like, sometimes they are feeling like those work are too much for them. They will have a hard time concentrating. Their mind will just like look to other places while doing the work. It's just very hard for them to focusing on one small details or consistent task. And also, they often found leave his or her seat in the classroom. They often run or climb excessively when it's not appropriate, and frequently have difficulty playing quietly. They will not stop talking. They will eager to share their ideas and thoughts. That is also one symptom of ADHD. Always seems on the go, talk excessively, burst on the answer before questions. So after I introduce all of those symptoms, definitely if you see like someone who have a severe symptoms showing this case, you should definitely reach out to a doctor or reach out to a therapist, try to help them. But the main reason why I want to tell all of this information to you is because as you are the top one gate for yourself, you are the top one thing you can detect for yourself. Hey, I know what's going on with me. I know what symptoms do I myself have. So just knowing those symptoms, you can definitely help yourself the first, and then you can help others. So now the question is, what we can do to others, to this community, or even to the friends around you, given the condition that we already know those symptoms, we already know those knowledge or those facts about mental illness. So in my opinion, there's three steps we can do. The first step is know the sign, know the symptoms or the sign of certain mental illness, especially at the early stage, so we can step in and provide help. The second step is know where to get help. For example, right, if you know someone is having cancer, you would not say, hey, I know how to treat cancer. Just come over to my place and I will like take the cancer out, take the tumor out. This is obviously not a way to do it, right? So you will need to know where to get help about mental illness. Which doctor can I refer to, or which law should I follow? Which place should I go? Those information are also crucial. And the third thing is always take care of yourself before you can take care of others. Like when you're on the airplane, right? The air attendants will always tell you to, hey, put on your air mask before you put on others, because you might get into coma when you're loss of oxygen, and at that point you cannot help others. So always take care of yourself first. So let's review them step by step and see what else information they haven't given you yet. The first part is know the sign. So this is also from the doctors who are giving me lecture 2 days ago, and he told me there are like a 4D. You can try to see a person who are suffering from mental illness, or living with mental health conditions. Those 4D are defiance, dysfunction, distress, and danger. Sometimes the people who are living in mental illness or mental health problems, they often will see a defiance, sorry for bad pronounce. And in this case, it just means that they're having trouble understanding certain things. They're having trouble understanding themselves. They're having like a misdirection of themselves, or they understand certain concept very wrong. And the second part is dysfunction, which just means they will have function disabilities, like they cannot maintain a healthy routine, they cannot stay hygiene, sometimes they cannot even eat or drink in a severe mental illness case. Or in the normal case, they cannot study, they cannot focus, like in the ADHD part, they cannot perform well in school and social life. Those are all dysfunction. And distress is very obvious. They're obvious in distress. They're in a lot of pain. They're in depressed. They're regretting about this. They're hurting themselves. And 4 is the danger. They usually will create a danger to himself first or to herself first. And then they will create a danger to others, the people who are living around him. So those are the 4D you can see if a person who are living with or suffering with mental illness. And for the SAM, it is also another rule you can judge someone as the sleep, activity, and meal. This more like, to me, belongs to the dysfunction group. Whether he can be able to sleep well, be able to activity well, be able to act well, like socialize or study good in college or high school, or in middle school, in education path, I should say, yeah. And also if the person can eat well. So those are some early signs that you should definitely pay attention to. If a person like does not show any distress, he's not showing danger to others, he's only like having depressed or like, get upset for a few days, then maybe it's okay. So again, the 2 weeks line is very crucial. If you know a person who are showing the same symptoms for more than 2 weeks and it's not getting any better, you should definitely reach out to them and say, hey, do you think we should get a doctor appointment? Do you think we should, take this to the next step? Rather than just wasting time and do nothing. So 2 weeks is definitely a crucial timeline. And since there are so many factors to mental illness, as I mentioned before, there are biological causes, there are physiological causes. So you should definitely consider, hey, maybe I'm having a down days because of this or because of that, but it will not because of one thing. Your feeling is a mixed component of all the elements you're experiencing, like your family, like your school life, like your work life, or even your friends. So definitely do not try to blame every single one of the factors. This is no one's fault. And besides those typical signs for the typical mental illness, for example, ADHD, they will have a hard time concentrating, have 2 extreme feelings. For all mental illness, excessive worrying or fear, feeling excessively sad or low, confused thinking or problem concentrating and learning, extreme mood changes, including uncontrollable heights or feeling of euphoria, prolonged to strong feelings or irritability or of anger, avoiding friends and social activities. So definitely check out that specific symptoms first. And then if it's not quite right, you can always come back to this. Watch out for common signs that are last over 2 weeks, like difficulties understanding or relating to other people, change in sleeping habits, or feeling tired and low energy. Changes in eating habits, such as increased hunger or lack of appetite. Change in sex drive, difficulty perceiving reality, delusion or hallucination, in which a person experiences and senses things that don't exist in objective reality. Inability to perceive changes in one's own feelings, behavior, or personality. overuse of substance like alcohol or drugs, multiple physical alignment without obvious causes, such as headaches, stomach ache, vague and ongoing ache and pains. Think about suicide, which I'll get to later, or probably the next slide. Inability to carry out daily activities or handle daily problems and stress, an intense fear of weight gain or concern with appearance. Those are all some common signs. Again, this is only for a very early stage. If you have a sense that someone is going through a severe problem or it's really heavy, you should 100% reach out to a doctor. And now we have about the suicide prevention. Asylum is a NAMICC program which is oriented to tell the college and high school student about the early signs of suicide and how we can prevent them. So this is just like a presentation, which maybe the Hillbridge and NAMICC Contra Costa will collaborate together and present an end of silence on campus. So stay tuned for that. And in this presentation, we will cover the basic thing like about the early sign of suicide and also the depression and early sign of mental illness. But there are some particular slides I want to point out. First of all is what you can do. So first, definitely if you're having like a concern about someone who is having or living with a severe mental illness, you should definitely talk to a trusted adult. For example, your family members, for example, teachers or professors on campus, or you can talk to a doctor or a psychiatrist. And definitely talk to a friend. Send a message to someone who cares about you. Use resources on the card, which I will mention maybe on the in-campus presentation about ending the silence. So yeah. So there are a lot of things you can do, and also you can do to help a friend. Recognize the warning sign and share your concerns with them. Encourage your friend to talk to a trusted adult. Sharing resources with support and information. Include them in your social plans. Help them stay positive. Encourage them to follow their treatment plan. Check in regularly. Listen and offer support. So there is a study about preventing suicide, and turns out, hey, for example, right, if I'm having suicidal thoughts, I'm talking to my friend, hey, maybe I don't want to live. It's just so hard. And if that friend continuing a conversation with me, he's like, no, Leo, come talk to me. What happened? Like, how can I help you? Like, just by joining that conversation, it will reduce the chance of suicide attempts by 50%, which is a huge number. Just by talking to them, simply following up what they're about to do, like just to check in them, that will decrease 50% of getting suicide attempts. So definitely stay in tune, stay in touch with them. Which brings us to the kind of topic for the day. The main reason and the main purpose why I'm here is to reduce stigma and take action. If you're having some of the symptoms or depressed, do not fear to reach out for help. Again, this is no one's fault. This is not your fault. This is not your family's fault. This is not your school's fault. This is not anyone's fault. I'm saying this too repeatedly. But the main point is you need to reach out because the help is within reach. You can talk about mental health with friends and family. You can talk to anyone if possible. The main idea is to reduce stigma. There's no shame in this. Imagine just if you're having a cancer and you're afraid to talk to anyone because they may find out, hey, you have cancer. That is absurd, right? It is the same with mental illness. It is a real disease. So there's no shame. There's no stigma in this case. And as an individual, what we can do to help to reduce stigma, we can talk about this topic to our daily life, right? We can talk to our friends, let them know, hey, it is a real thing. It is a real disease. Do not bully or stereotype those patients, like call them psycho. This is not the right thing to do. We can also share links to resources on social media. We can call people out if they're using stigmatized language. And one example of stigmatized language will be this. As you may have find out in the presentation for several times, I have tried to say, hey, people who are living with mental illness, disorder, or conditions, we should never say someone is bipolar. But being bipolar can never define them. They are a person first, and then bipolar is a disease. They are suffering from this, but this disease cannot define them. So we should try to say someone who are living with bipolar disorder, or someone who are struggling to live with depression disorder. Definitely, we want to see the person first, and then the illness, the disease. Those things cannot define them. Always remember, mental health are medical conditions, just like cancer, like heart attack. It is not anyone's fault. And it's important to know the warning sign. And number 4 is my favorite quote. You are not alone. Remember that? 1/5 of Americans are suffering or have been suffering from mental conditions. You are not alone. And recovery is possible. There is hope. You have the power to end the silence. Why I say that recovery is possible? Because for a lot of times, trying to recover from a certain mental conditions, it is a lifelong journey. You have to, there is no like a cure for this. But the reason I say recovery is possible because there are many famous people who are living or have been affected by mental illness. An example, Dwayne Johnson. And I quote here, quote, I found that with depression, one of the most important things you could realize is that you're not alone. You're not the first to go through it. You are not going to be the last to go through it. Quote by Rock. A lot of famous people who have been living or affected with mental illness, they have never achieved full recovery. They're still living with mental illness, but they've learned to live with mental illness and also to discover themselves, to move along with it, to study from it and overcome it and become themselves. This is like the number 1 priority I would mention about mental illness. There is hope. There is definitely hope, and you can be success. And the last thing I want to mention about that, since Hillbridge and NAMICC API department collab to give this presentation, we would like to focus on each of the cultures or the ethnicity of the groups. So for example, right, if a white person who are suffering from depression compares to an Asian student who are suffering from depression, their symptoms and behavior will be very different. There's no way to conclude one type of person to a whole range of different symptoms and persons. So with that, let's talk about like a few. I know I can never cover every single one of them. So due to time requirement, I can only cover this 4 today. But one thing to mention now that those 4 are not the most important 4. I just picked them because there are a lot of people who are white African Americans, API, and Hispanic or Latino. They are not the most important one. I have to claim this. There are just 4 common ones. That's it. So for white Americans or for white cultural people, for white race people, the one normal thing we will find out on them is like their it's very hard to say because the most thing like I've experienced this in is like when you compare white to a minority groups such as API or Hispanic, or we're comparing them to the Indians, we can say that hey, they have a difference like this. But in general, white people, they are the most common. They are the I think 60% or 70% of the population in America is white. So those are like the more common or like the standard base. But for me, right, I'm a Chinese person. So when I talk to a white person, there will be cultural disagreement or cultural barriers that we might to look out for. So that is definitely the case for white. And when it comes to African Americans, there are shared cultural factors that play a role in helping define mental illness and supporting well-being, residency, and healing. So for being Blacks adult in US are more likely and are more likely than white adults to report persistent symptoms of emotional distress, such as sadness, hopelessness, and feel like everything is an effort. Black adults living below the poverty line are more than twice as likely to report serious psychological distress than those with more financial security. From the history view, the African Americans are suffering from slavery, they're suffering from racism, and all of those can create an enormous cultural pressure on them, which causes them to more likely to are suffering from mental illness. And family connection, value expression through spirituality or music will often found like very common in African American groups and often can help them. And now let's get to the AAPI, which is Asian American Pacific Islander. Myself consider myself as an AAPI community. And for this community, one example in Contra Costa County is that 13.9% of the population in this community is AAPI. So it is a third large minority groups. It is still a big chunk of people. And for us, our culture is very different than white people and African American people, since our culture lean more toward to the Eastern culture, where we value family, where we value friends and love, and especially the respect to elderly. And this could have like both side effect. For example, the mental health rate among the adults, among like the people who are over age of 18 and especially 24, the mental health, the people who are living with mental health conditions in API community is significantly lower than white and African Americans, because we together, we united as a family or as a group. So family will help each other and they can like lower the chances for mental illness. But that is not the case for teenagers, since a lot of the API teenagers who are living in United States are immigrants, and they often found in between the Eastern culture and the Western culture, they will have a conflict. So they will have more chance to risk themselves in having or living with some mental health conditions. And especially API communities have several factors that support mental health and well-being. But language barrier is definitely a big thing for them, since a lot of them Chinese immigrant or Asian immigrants, they cannot speak English when they first get here. Or even if they can, like me, I can speak English, but it's not my native language. I cannot speak fluently. I will still have language barriers or communication barriers when I'm talking to a psychiatrist, for example. When I'm talking to a therapist, for example. There will be some inconvenience in that. So that is definitely one thing. And another thing is that in the Chinese culture, typically, we tend to have a lot of stigma in mental illness. Just like I mentioned before, my family or my mom would tell that, hey, it's just a bad day. Like, or I remember in my childhood, we would joke around that, hey, you're a psycho. You should go to that psycho hospital in Beijing. Like we called it 回龙观医院. So it is pretty like a joke. You can joke around and make fun of those people. There is a lot of stigmatized in our culture. And finally, in Hispano or Latino group communities, they are the one groups that least likely to seek help for mental illness. It is even more stigmatized than the Eastern culture. If I recall correctly, the word for the Spanish group to call it, to be labeled loco, that is a word for crazy. Like they will call people who are living with mental illness loco. Like that is a typically cultural stigma to think about. And a lot of times, Hispano or Latino community, they will have lack of knowledge and awareness about mental health problems and services available. This is a cultural stigma. And also they will have language barrier from Spanish to English. And also the Latino and Hispano community, they show a large tendency of uninsured. They will usually, compared to white especially, they will not have insurance when they're going to the doctor, therapist, or the hospital. And this will often put them into financial mental health challenges. So they are the least likely group to seek help. That is all I think to recall and remember. But as I mentioned before, the most important thing before you can take care of anyone is to take care of yourself. And that is the first level of barrier in facing mental illness. So self-care is definitely crucial and important. And the meaning of self-care is just trying to recognizing when you are doing more than you can handle and trying to figure out what you need to do to slow down. Especially in Berkeley, since the studying pressure or like the peer pressure are very large, there are several students have already came to me in the one-on-one counseling session. They're talking to me that, hey, I can feel like the study pressure is really hard. But sometimes even if I try to slow down, there will be pressure from myself, saying that, hey, I'm just too lazy. Like I need to keep up to other peers and students. So a lot of times the pressure are coming from everywhere. So self-care is very crucial in this case. And we say that a lot of times there are a lot of things you can do to be self-care. So I will divide that into two parts, the physical part and the psychological part. The physical part is naturally just be able to sleep well, to have enough food or nutrition, and be able to have a nice body to overcome some basic difficulties. And the psychological part is we have mentally prepared yourself for the education path before you or after you, or you could say that, are you prepared for facing those pressure? And this is really, really a big challenge to do. So just please take care of yourself first and maybe drop by our one-on-one counseling session and talk to us, see what advice or like comforting words we can give out to you. And one of the last page I'm having is the recovery. Recovery in mental illness, it is very difficult and often it is a long journey. But just as Dwayne Johnson stated that a long journey doesn't mean it is a horrible journey or a terrible journey. You could overcome or live with this thing with your whole life, and it will become a treasure of you. It will become a ability of you because you can take it, you overcome it, and you learn from it. You are not alone. So with that, that concludes our meeting. And thank you so much for watching this. And again, if you need any help on UC Berkeley campus, please reach out to our Hillbridge organization and maybe drop by our support groups, which is on every test week, Friday, it is in person. More information, please go to the WeChat and check it out or the link we're having. Thank you so much for watching this and good luck.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.